Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for a pretty high-stakes journey. We're looking at the years 1854 to 1861, a period that, well, history shows us, was the critical prelude to the American Civil War.
Yeah.
Our mission really is to understand how, in just 7 incredibly volatile years, the ways people solved problems politically, especially around slavery, just vanished, completely evaporated.
It's the era of spectacular failure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Both, moral and political failure. And to frame this whole discussion, I think we have to keep Lincoln's famous 1858 quote in mind. A house divided against itself cannot stand.
Right.
So we'll walk chronologically through the key events that brought this division to a violent head. We're talking about the actual fighting in Kansas, the Dred Scott decision, which was just incendiary, the collapse of the Democratic Party as a national force, and then that sectional election that finally triggered secession.
Okay, let's unpack this and maybe start somewhere that seems a bit counterintuitive for a political breakdown. The incredible power of literature. 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. That seems like the first match, right?
It absolutely was. And this wasn't just, a popular book. It was a genuine phenomenon. It came out of this deep evangelical feeling. Stowe, she was a mother of 6, apparently quite slight, but she was outraged by the fugitive slave law. And she channeled that anger into showing the moral wickedness of slavery. Her focus wasn't really economics. It was the cruelty, the splitting up of black families.
And the reaction was just huge. The numbers we've seen are kind of staggering. Hundreds of thousands of copies sold in the first year alone. Millions eventually. Translated into, over 20 languages?
Yeah, and adapted for the stage, too, these really popular Tom shows. History tells us no other novel in American history ever had that kind of political impact.
Yeah.
Lincoln supposedly even said to her in 1862, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." Whether he actually said it or not, it shows the perception.
Wow. And it wasn't just in America, right?
No, that political force went global. The intensity of tomania, as they called it, really influenced ordinary people in Britain and France. So later, when the Confederacy was looking for help overseas, that anti-slavery feeling, partly fueled by the book, was so strong it made those European governments think twice about stepping in for the South. It was like this early form of diplomatic pressure.
So that's the moral outrage from the North. But then, just a few years later, 1857, we get a totally different kind of literary grenade. Hinton R. Harper's The Impending Crisis of the South.
Harper is such an interesting figure, a paradox, really. He was a non-aristocratic white guy from North Carolina who intensely disliked both slavery and black people.
Right.
His argument was totally different from Stowe's. It was all statistics and economics, and it was aimed right at the poor white majority in the South.
He basically said the planter elite, the aristocracy, was actually hurting the non-slaveholding white folks the most, that the system was crippling them financially.
Exactly that. He was trying to drive a wedge between the majority of Southern whites and the powerful planter class. And, unsurprisingly, the book was banned down south. They had book-burning parties.
Seriously, book burnings?
Oh, yeah. But up north, the new Republican Party saw its potential. They printed up thousands of condensed versions, used them as campaign literature, which, of course, just fed the Southern planters' growing fear that the non-slaveholding whites were, a threat from within.
Okay, that really sets the stage for the next flashpoint, the territories. Let's talk about Kansas. This is where the whole idea of popular sovereignty letting settlers decide about slavery just descends into actual warfare. Bleeding Kansas.
Yeah, this is where the political theory just crashed and burned spectacularly. When the Kansas-Nebraska Act kind of opened the door, Northerners didn't mess around. The New England Immigrant Aid Company sent about 2,000 settlers pretty quickly. Their goal was to stop the South from making it a slave state.
And they weren't just bringing plows?
No, crucially, they brought Sharps rifles, breech-loading rifles, and they immediately got nicknamed Beecher's Bibles.
After Henry Ward Beecher, right? Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother. He helped raise money for them. So the literary fire literally turns into firepower.
It did. Meanwhile, Southerners felt totally betrayed. They kind of thought Kansas was implicitly promised to them as a slave state. But few were actually willing to risk bringing valuable enslaved people into a place where fighting was basically guaranteed. I mean, the records are stark. By 1860, there were only 2 slaves officially in Kansas territory. But the fighting, already brutal.
And the politics just fell apart instantly.
Completely. In 1855, you have these pro-slavery border ruffians coming over from Missouri, voting illegally, setting up their own puppet government at Shawnee Mission. So the Free Soilers, naturally, they set up their own rival extra-legal government in Topeka. Two governments, neither legitimate.
Chaos, and then it escalates.
Explodes, really.
Hmm.
In 1856, pro-slavery raiders burned down part of the Free Soil town of Lawrence. And that brings in this figure, John Brown, Old Brown of Pottawatomie, a real fanatic abolitionist. He decides it's time for, well, what he saw as divine justice.
What did he do?
He led his followers to Pottawatomie Creek, and they dragged 5 men they presumed were pro-slavery out of their cabins and hacked them to pieces, just brutally murdered them.
God, that's it.
And that horrific act, that massacre, it really marks the start of a real civil war in Kansas. It dragged on for about 5 years. But even with all the violence, the pro-slavery side tried one more political trick.
Yeah.
The Lecompton Constitution in 1857.
Yes, this thing. It was notoriously fraudulent, wasn't it?
Oh, completely transparent.
Yeah.
They set it up so people could vote with slavery, or with no slavery. Sounds fair, right? But the catch was, the Constitution protected all existing slave owners no matter how people voted.
So slavery was guaranteed to stay either way.
Exactly. It made the vote totally meaningless. The Free Soilers saw right through it, boycotted the vote, called it what it was, a scam to force slavery on them.
And the reaction from Washington is really telling here. President James Buchanan, a Northerner, he actually backed this fraud.
He did, yeah. He was heavily influenced by Southern advisors.
Yeah.
But Stephen A. Douglas, the guy who came up with popular sovereignty in the first place, he fought against Lecompton.
Even though it hurt him politically.
Yeah, he saw it as a total betrayal of the democratic idea he was pushing. He called it a semi-popular fraudulency. His stand was pretty courageous, actually. It forced the Constitution back for a real popular vote, where it was soundly defeated. But in doing that, Douglas basically blew up the Democratic Party, the last real national institution holding things together. He split it right down the middle.
And that split wasn't just in party meetings or out west. It spilled right onto the floor of Congress. The Sumner-Brooks affair.
Yeah, this is 1856.
Yeah.
It shows just how raw things were, how emotion had completely replaced reason. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, a very vocal abolitionist, gave this speech, The Crime Against Kansas.
Right.
And he didn't just attack pro-slavery arguments. He got really personal. He insulted Senator Andrew Butler of South Carolina, even mocked his speech impediment, made fun of his state. It was nasty.
And the response was physical.
Immediate and violent. Congressman Preston Brooks, who was Butler's cousin, felt he had to defend his relative's honor and South Carolina's honor. So he walked up to Sumner, who was sitting at his Senate desk, and just beat him savagely with a heavy cane. Hit him again and again until the cane broke.
Good Lord, Sumner was badly hurt.
Oh, terribly. His injuries were so severe he couldn't return to his Senate seat for 3.5 years. But Massachusetts defiantly kept re-electing him, leaving his seat empty as a symbol.
And the reaction across the country split again.
Totally split. The North was horrified, saw Brooks as a barbarian, a thug. But in the South, Brooks was a hero. People sent him hundreds of new canes. Some even had gold heads. As historians point out, those blows in the Senate, they were really among the first blows of the Civil War itself. It showed dialogue was dead.
Wow. So discourse breaks down into violence. The last national party is fracturing. And then the crisis hits the Supreme Court. The Dred Scott decision in 1857.
Right. This lands just days after Buchanan becomes president.
Oh.
A legal bombshell. And it started as a seemingly simple case, didn't it? Dred Scott, an enslaved man, sued for his freedom because he had lived for years on free soil in Illinois and Wisconsin territory.
So why did it become so catastrophic?
Chief Justice Roger Taney from Maryland delivered this sweeping 3-part ruling that just wiped out decades of political compromise. First, he said Scott, because he was black, wasn't a citizen and therefore had no right to even sue in federal court. Second, Taney argued that slaves are private property. And under the Fifth Amendment, Congress couldn't take property without due process. So a slave owner could take their property, their slaves, into any federal territory.
Any territory. Which leads to the third point, the real killer blow.
Exactly. Taney declared the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the law that had banned slavery north of the 36-degree 30-minute line for over 30 years, was unconstitutional all along. He said Congress never had the power to ban slavery in the territories.
So the entire platform of the Republican Party stopping slavery's expansion was just declared illegal by the Supreme Court.
Pretty much. Southern leaders were ecstatic, of course, but Republicans were absolutely furious. They basically called it a non-binding opinion, an obiter dictum, and just refused to accept it, said they wouldn't obey it.
So the highest court makes a ruling and a major party just says, nope.
Right. It just dug the trenches deeper. Any chance of a legal or political solution seemed gone. And then, as if that wasn't enough chaos, the economy completely tanked that same year.
The Panic of 1857. Perfect timing, huh? What kicked that off?
It was a mix of things. Inflation from California gold, grain markets going crazy because of the Crimean War ending, and just wild speculation in land and railroads. Typical boom and bust cycle, really.
But the impact wasn't even across the country.
No, and that's the crucial part politically. It was psychologically maybe the worst panic of the century, but it hit the North much harder. Grain farmers, manufacturers, they suffered badly. But the South, cotton prices were sky high. They basically rode out the storm fairly easily.
And that had political consequences.
Big ones. It dangerously reinforced the South's belief that cotton was king. They thought the North, maybe even the world, was economically dependent on them. It made them feel more confident, more insulated, maybe even invincible. They figured the North couldn't afford to or wouldn't dare to fight them.
And the economic pain in the North gave the Republicans new issues for 1860, didn't it? Issues that lined up perfectly with their anti-slavery stance.
Absolutely. Two big ones emerged. First, free farms. The demand for the government to give away 160-acre homesteads out west. Great for Western settlers and Eastern workers wanting a new start. But Eastern industrialists hated it. They'd lose cheap labor. And the South really hated it. It meant more free soil states, tipping the balance against them.
Okay, free land. What was the second?
Higher tariffs. Northern manufacturers were hurting from the panic, and they blamed the low tariff of 1857, which had been passed under Southern pressure. They demanded protection for their industries. The South, needing cheap manufactured goods, resisted fiercely. So now you have the Republicans pushing free soil, free land, and protective tariffs, a package that appealed almost exclusively to Northern interests.
This perfect storm of crisis, political, legal, economic, it really sets the stage for Abraham Lincoln's rise, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Lincoln, this tall, kind of awkward, self-educated lawyer from Illinois, honest Abe, he'd been involved in politics. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act in '54 really reignited his ambition. Then in 1858, he challenges the big political star of the day, Stephen Douglas, for the Illinois Senate seat.
A little giant.
Right. And this leads to the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates, 7 of them, all across Illinois. The whole country was watching.
And Lincoln brilliantly corners Douglas with the Freeport question, right?
He really does. It's a masterstroke.
Yeah.
He asks Douglas, okay, the Supreme Court in Dred Scott says territories must allow slavery, but your idea, popular sovereignty, says the people living there can vote it down. So who wins, the court or the people? It put Douglas in an impossible bind.
How did Douglas answer?
He came up with what's known as the Freeport Doctrine. He basically said, look, slavery might be legally allowed, but it can't exist anywhere unless local laws support it. Police regulations, slave codes, that kind of thing. So if the people in a territory don't want slavery, they just don't pass those laws, and slavery will effectively stay down.
Clever. Did it work?
Well, it worked enough for him to win the Senate election in Illinois. Barely. But nationally, it was a disaster for him. By suggesting a way to get around the Dred Scott decision, he absolutely infuriated Southern Democrats. They saw it as a betrayal. It pretty much killed any chance he had of getting their support for president in 1860.
But Lincoln
Lost the Senate race, but he won the long game. The debates made him a national figure, a powerful voice for the Republican cause. Suddenly, he's a serious contender for the presidency.
Okay, so the political stage is set for 1860. But before we get there, there's one more act of shocking violence. Yeah. John Brown returns.
Yeah, just when you think things can't get more polarized. John Brown launches his raid on Harpers Ferry, Virginia in October 1859.
This was way beyond Kansas. This was an attack on a federal arsenal. What was he thinking?
His plan was incredibly audacious, maybe delusional. He wanted to seize the federal weapons at Harpers Ferry, arm local slaves, trigger a massive uprising, and create a free black state somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains, a sanctuary.
How'd it go?
It failed, quickly. He and about 20 followers, including several black men, did seize the armory. But the slaves didn't rise up as he expected. Local militia pinned them down, and then U.S. Marines arrived, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Brown was captured, wounded, and quickly put on trial.
Convicted of murder and treason, right, and executed.
Correct. And his execution instantly transformed him. In the North, many abolitionists saw him as a martyr. Ralph Waldo Emerson famously compared him to Jesus. He became St. John Brown, dying for the cause of liberty.
But in the South?
Pure horror and outrage. They saw him as nothing but a terrorist, a murderer. And crucially, they believed his raid proved their deepest fears, that the North, especially the Republican Party, was actively funding and encouraging people like Brown to invade their states, kill their families, and incite slave rebellion. Harpers Ferry basically destroyed any remaining trust between the sections.
It just seems like every event pushes the sides further apart, making conflict almost unavoidable. Which brings us right to the election of 1860.
Yeah, the point of no return. The Democratic Party finally shattered completely. They couldn't even agree on a candidate or a platform. Southern delegates walked out of the main convention in Charleston when Douglas wouldn't fully endorse expanding slavery everywhere, based on his Lecompton and Freeport stances.
So the Democrats split?
Split into two.
Yeah.
Northern Democrats nominated Douglas, sticking with popular sovereignty. Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, demanding federal protection for slavery in the territories and even wanting to annex Cuba as a new slave state.
And there were other parties, too.
Yeah, a third group, mostly former Whigs and know-nothings from the border states, formed the Constitutional Union Party. They nominated John Bell of Tennessee.
Yeah.
Their platform was basically ignore the slavery issue and just focus on the Union, the Constitution, and the enforcement of the laws. A desperate plea for unity.
And then the Republicans nominate Lincoln?
Right. Meeting in Chicago, they sensed victory. Their platform was skillfully designed to appeal to pretty much every group in the North and West except the South. Non-extension of slavery for the abolitionists and free soilers. A protective tariff for the manufacturers in the Northeast, a Pacific Railroad for the West Coast interests, and free homesteads, land for the landless, for farmers and settlers.
A purely sectional platform.
Entirely. And Lincoln won. He got 180 electoral votes, a clear majority. But, and this is critical, he was a minority president. He only got about 39.8% of the popular vote.
Less than 40%.
Yeah. And he was purely sectional president. His name wasn't even on the ballot in 10 southern states. Now, it's important to note, even if all three of his opponents, Douglas, Breckinridge, and Bell, had somehow combined all their popular votes, Lincoln still would have won the Electoral College because he carried almost all the populous northern states.
But the South didn't see it that way. They saw a president elected entirely by the North on a platform hostile to their core institution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They felt like they had no voice, no future in the Union, led by Lincoln and the Republicans. And they acted immediately. South Carolina seceded just 4 days after the election results were clear.
4 days. Wow.
And then the dominoes fell fast. 6 other states from the deep South, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas followed suit. By February 1861, before Lincoln was even inaugurated, these 7 states met, formed the Confederate States of America, and chose Jefferson Davis as their president.
Was there any last-ditch effort to stop this? Any compromise attempt?
There was one final desperate attempt. The Crittenden Amendments, proposed by Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky. The idea was basically to go back to the old Missouri Compromise line, 36 degrees, 30 minutes. Slavery would be banned north of that line in all territories.
Yeah.
But, and this was key, it would be given federal protection south of that line in all territories now held or hereafter acquired.
So protected south of the line, including potential future territories like maybe Cuba or Mexico?
That was the implication, but Lincoln rejected it, flat out.
Why? It seemed like maybe the last chance.
He felt he couldn't. He'd been elected on a platform explicitly opposing the expansion of slavery. He believed that was the core principle the voters had endorsed. Yielding on that, especially the hereafter acquired part, seemed like giving a green light to future slave-driven expansionism. He reportedly worried it would just be a perpetual covenant of war as the South sought new lands. With Lincoln's rejection, the last real hope of compromise died.
And all this is happening while President Buchanan is still in office? The lame duck period? What did he do?
Basically nothing. Buchanan was sort of paralyzed. He didn't believe states could legally secede. He said that clearly. But he also couldn't find any authority in the Constitution, as he read it, to use force to stop them.
So he just watched?
Pretty much.
Not much.
He was also worried, maybe rightly, that if he used force, it might push the crucial border states like Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee out of the Union and into the Confederacy. So he essentially waited it out, leaving the whole crisis on Lincoln's doorstep when he took office in March 1861.
And the secessionists, how did they justify breaking away?
Well, they felt the political balance had tipped irrevocably against them. They called it the crime of the census, meaning the North's growing population gave it too much power. They were tired of decades of abolitionist criticism and interference, like John Brown's raid. And, partly because of the Panic of 1857, they genuinely believed the North wouldn't, or couldn't, fight because it was too dependent on Southern cotton and Southern debts. They saw themselves as patriots, really reenacting the American Revolution, throwing off the tyranny of the North and King Abraham Lincoln.
So we've really traced this chain reaction, haven't we, from, moral outrage sparked by a book,
Yeah, through political cheating and actual violence in Kansas.
the Supreme Court decision that blew up compromise,
The economic factors that divided the country and fueled Southern confidence,
the complete breakdown of the national political parties.
leading finally to that purely sectional election in 1860,
Mhm.
and then secession. It all happened so fast looking back.
It really did. And given this incredibly deep split we've talked about, ideologically, economically, morally, where Northerners saw slavery's expansion as a threat to their whole way of life, and Southerners truly believed the North wanted to destroy theirs, it raises that big question for you, the listener, to think about. Was the Civil War really, as some historians argue, an irrepressible conflict, something that just had to happen given these deep divisions?
Or could different choices have been made? Could better political leadership, avoiding what some call the mistakes of the blundering generation, have found some path, some compromise to avoid the catastrophe? Was it inevitable, or was it a failure of politics at the crucial moment?
That failure right at the brink is maybe the most tragic part of this whole story, something definitely worth considering.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the explosive and ultimately tragic prelude to the Union's split.